Hello, everyone. I'm Walter Gordon. If you've attended any of our webinars before, you've seen my face, Chair of the Niagara Frontier Section, and also with John Cressides, Vice Chair, and Lieutenant General Retired Jack Shanahan, whom you will undoubtedly see more of shortly. I'm going to share my screen here for a moment and present a few slides about the section, and then we'll get started with the main event. Okay, there we go. Can you guys see my upcoming NFS event slide? Good, I see a thumbs up. Okay, so June 16th, our speaker is going to be Chris Gaynor, the author of Arrows to the Moon, and he's going to talk about the Canadian engineers that went to NASA in 1959 after the Arrow was canceled. And there's some remarkably significant figures in that. Jim Chamberlain was the first program manager of Gemini. Owen Maynard was the chief NASA engineer for the lunar module. And John Hodge was the second NASA flight director after Chris Kraft. He was actually a flight director before Gene Kranz of Apollo 13 fame. And just coincidentally, after we got Chris as our speaker, I started reading this book. I'm just at the beginning, Apollo by Charles Murray and Catherine Bly Cox. Terrific book so far about the Apollo program. And they have a quote from a legacy NASA engineer about the Canadian engineers. They never gained much public recognition for their contribution to the manned space program, but to the people within the program, their contribution was incalculable. And I thought this was really something. They had it all over us in some areas, just brilliant guys. They were more mature and dignified, and they were bright as hell and talented and cordial and professional to a man. So we're going to hear Chris Gaynor talking about those folks next month. As far as right now, recommended Zoom configuration, hide non-video participants, so you'll just see General Shanahan when John and I turn off our video. Select single speaker during the talk. Submit comments or technical issues via the chat. Submit questions via the Q&A, but we will keep our eyes on the chat in case a question gets in there by accident. If you want to reach out to us afterwards, say for the recording of the talk for a friend, this is our email, nf.aiaa@gmail.com. It's the account that you would have received the invite from for this talk. Okay, brief introduction. Lieutenant General Jack Shanahan, talk a little bit about his military education. As a major, he attended Command and Staff College at the Naval War College. As a lieutenant colonel, he went to the National War College. And then as an '06 or a brigadier general, he was a senior executive fellow at the John F. Kennedy School of Government at Harvard. In the air, he was an F-4 E&G instructor evaluator and weapons school grad. The G, of course, was the Wild Weasel aircraft. And for those who aren't familiar with Air Force Weapons School, it used to be called Fighter Weapons School, but now they have it for all their platforms, or at least many of them. Uh, it's sort of like the Navy's Top Gun, except in addition to air-to-air combat, it's a lot more comprehensive at the end so far as running an air war. It's about twice as long as Top Gun. Same thing in the Strike Eagle, an instructor evaluator and a weapons school graduate. He has over 2,800 hours of flight time. He was the director of Project Maven, which I expect he's going to talk to a little bit. If you've never heard of it, you should Google it. It's fascinating and it's already been employed. And he was the first director of the Joint Artificial Intelligence Center in the Office of the Department of Defense, Chief Information Office at the Pentagon. And with that, I will stop sharing my screen and turn it over to you, General Shanahan.
Okay, thanks very much, Walter and John, and thanks for everybody for participating in the webinar. And before I get launched into the presentation, when talking about NASA, I'm sure everybody else on this call was as enthralled as I was by the Artemis mission. It's just incredible to see what that played out. And one of my favorite books has always been Carrying the Fire by Michael Collins, the one that didn't get all the attention because he was there in the module as everything else was going on behind him. So with that said, I want to get into talk about this. I don't know, the slides came up, but then they didn't come up. So let me try it again. Okay, so I hope you all should see the slide. If not, just let me know. When it's speaking to this audience in particular, it's a little hard for me to know how deep some people are in AI. So the last thing I want to do is insult anybody's intelligence, but I do understand most people don't know what's going on in the world of AI in the military. And I will focus on the military. I will talk about Project Maven, which involved a lot of the intel side of this, but this will be mostly about the core military, the Pentagon side of it. I'm going to go through these slides as quickly as I can. It will take us a while to get through them. I hope to leave time for some discussion as we go through it and get to the rest of it. What you should see come up is just a very quick summary of my background. As you already said, F4, then Strike Eagle, at Seymour Johnson Air Force Base, Clark Air Base in the Philippines, then weapons school, and then just a variety of different assignments. It's hard to quite put justice to the career I had. I don't think anybody quite had the same career to go from the fighter aviation world to commanding intel groups and then command and control wing, 55th wing at Offutt Air Force Base, then commanded down in San Antonio at the Air Force ISRT, became 25th Air Force, and then after I left it, it's 16th Air Force today. And then a full 25% of my career was spent in that five-sided puzzle palace in Washington, D.C., known as the Pentagon. So 9 years total as an O6. A one star as a one star, some of you may be familiar with the Joint Staff J39, which I call the dark arts world of the Joint Staff, all the special programs, SAP, STO, information operations, ISR, all of that is a very busy time in the world as a one star. And then finally came back in my last 5 years as a three-star, came back in as the Director for Defense Intelligence Warfighter Support. That was my day job in the Undersecretary of Defense of Intelligence. But from that, got launched into this thing called AI, and I'll talk about that journey. For the last, about 18, until about 18 months ago, when people talked about AI, this is generally what they were presenting. It's pulling a rabbit out of a hat. And then within the last 18 months, it's sort of the spotlight has shifted to large language models. Today, you hear the word frontier model, but really, I put ChatGPT out there. It's portrayed too often as a magic trick. The question is, of course, how much of this is real and how much is overstated hype, the idea of how much can these really do in an operational environment. I'm going to tell you, I am continually surprised by the rate of progress of the things that I'm seeing with AI. Unfortunately, the spotlight is a little bit too much on the large language models. There's a lot else going on with computer vision, natural language processing, the things that I would call traditional AI, but really it's mostly about frontier models today. But I want to talk through this. I would say until about a year ago, I would have really sort of dismissed some of the larger claims about AI. I don't dismiss them anymore. It's just changing too fast, and glad to talk more about that as we go through. I love this slide. This is one of the things that AI can actually do is put out pretty good slides. This is a quote from a daily newsletter on called The Neuron. If any of you are interested in a nice single source daily update on AI, The Neuron is an excellent one to turn to. It not only talks about what the latest and greatest is in the big commercial AI tech companies, but also what businesses are doing to put it to use out in the commercial world. Not a whole lot of national security related things, as you could understand why, but they do touch on all the things that I really find interesting every day. So it does feel like it is moving faster than a mongoose on amphetamine. Not that I've ever actually seen a mongoose on amphetamine, but I suppose it looks like that. Like everybody on this call, I have dealt with an awful lot of so-called cutting edge technologies in my life and in my 36-year military career. I have never seen anything with so diametrically opposed opinions as I have with AI. In the upper left, you got Mark Andreessen saying in his techno optimist manifesto, and it was a manifesto saying this is the only way we will get to this idea of utopia. You must kind of treat technology as sort of this godlike capability. And yet in the bottom right, a whole bunch of people signed a letter saying mitigating the risk of extinction from AI should be a global priority alongside other societal scale risks, such as pandemics and nuclear war. On the lower left is how AI is going to change us all from the better. In the upper right, which is a book that I read and was asked to review, and I very cautiously provided a little bit of a blurb for it. If anyone builds it, everyone dies. So you have this stark contrast in what people are saying about AI. Jen, I've just never seen anything quite like this in all the other technologies that I've ever dealt with. And then just within the past 2 days, the Pope himself has come out with an encyclical letter on AI. It is a fascinating read. It's about 45,000 words, but in the introduction to it, I would say the Pope says more things about AI from a practical point of view than the tech companies are saying. They're the ones that are almost having a messianic view of AI. So the world has kind of reversed on its axis. The Pope's talking about the practicalities of AI, and you got this religious zeal sometimes coming from the big tech companies. It's a very odd feeling, but this is really worth reading. If you haven't seen this yet, there's some very powerful words in there. Religion aside, this is just a story about the human interaction with AI and some cautions about technological determinism and how human agency matters in this future we're all entering. Um, Now, to get more down specifically into AI and national security, I always try to stay up with what the polling says about what's happening in the United States and around the world. These are very interesting numbers to me. You can see them themselves. I don't have to read them all, but it's so fascinating that only 15% of the people who are polled indicated that using AI in war is necessary or inevitable, which is a little hard to believe because AI is being used in war right now. And I'm going to get into that a little bit more. Not surprisingly, especially for this audience, you understand there's a lot of opinions on lethal autonomous weapon systems and the use of AI for just autonomy in general. The one at the bottom is also sort of gets my attention. Um, Less than 50% of Americans think that AI technology will make national security risks better. That number drops fairly substantially when you talk about Gen Z. And if you followed any of the news over just the last week and a half or so, you've seen a number of stories about commencement ceremonies in universities and colleges where the audience is booing the speaker when they bring up AI. One of those speakers was Eric Schmidt. What he said was actually, I thought, quite reasonable, but just AI has become a lightning rod for Gen Z for a lot of different reasons. But it is something that we ought to pay attention to as we bring AI into the national security enterprise. Not every American is that fired up about what we're trying to do. But also in this idea of AI and national security, here's a question that is a very legitimate question. A number of journalists have said, are we seeing the first AI war? Here's how I answer that question. One, there is more AI being used in the US military in conflict than at any point in history. There's no question about it. But it is not an AI war. It is an enabling function. It is not revolutionary at this point. It's kind of beginning to see the signs of transformation, but it is not a war-winning technology unto itself. We get so caught up in talking about the tech as opposed to what the tech is enabling. So we are not seeing the first AI war, but we are seeing quite a bit of use of AI, and it's not going to decrease. It will continue to increase. So at some point, somebody will label a conflict the first AI war. Right now, the people saying it, not surprisingly, would be Palantir, who get the marketing of saying we're in an AI war. But you could make the case, as I have made the case to a few journalists, the US has all this AI. Iran essentially has zero, as far as I can tell. Yet by itself, AI has not determined that the US wins and Iran loses. It's a much more complicated strategic picture than that. So I don't want to get caught up in the technology itself. It's what we do with the technology. I hope this pretty much obvious to this audience, but I do want to talk just briefly about this. Why do we care about AI in the military? My going in argument, the theory of the case, as it were, and I put potential in italics very deliberately. It has the potential to improve effectiveness and efficiency in every military mission, from the back office to the battlefield, from undersea to outer space to cyberspace, electronic warfare, everything else in between. Potential. It doesn't mean it will. Everything's going to be very context dependent, but that's the entering argument. For me, I always thought there were two seminal moments. One is the 2014, where Ash Carter, as the secretary, signed out the very famous now 2014 Defense Innovation Initiative memo, which launched DIUX, Defense Innovation Unit Experimental, on the West Coast, designed to be a bridge between commercial technology companies and the Pentagon. And there was really no relationship back in those times. So this was all Carter trying to get this relationship going. And then much more personal experience for me, although I work under Ash Carter, but I worked closer with Bob Work, and his was the third offset strategy. I won't get into the history of the first and second offset. First offset, largely tactical nuclear weapons, even though there is no such tactical weapons, just say battlefield nuclear weapons to give us a leg up on our adversaries. And that, in those days, the Soviet Union. The second offset was precision, stealth, GPS, all those things that happened in the 80s and 90s. And then what Bob Work was looking to do as the deputy is, what is the third offset? What is going to give the US military another opportunity to leapfrog past its adversaries and potential adversaries? So Bob Work was there at the creation of Project Maven. He is the person that made Maven happen, but he would always say, I'm going to talk about Maven in more detail, but Bob Work would always say, I'm not telling you that this AI is important for AI's sake. It was AI to get to a more intelligent, autonomous military that will give us an advantage over adversaries in the future. So if you save that until almost at the very end, I want to come back to the third offset strategy. In 2017, when I entered this picture, the DoD was way behind commercial industry in adopting AI. Never mind doing it fast and doing it at scale. None of it was happening. The department was getting crushed by a lot of different people, including Congress, the media, and the Defense Innovation Board, at that time led by Eric Schmidt, saying, you guys don't see what's happening in commercial industry. You're way behind. You've got to do something. So Bob Work had this front and center. Ash Carter was thinking about it. Then Mark Esper was thinking about it. And Jim Mattis was thinking about it. And then, of course, regardless of what we were doing, China and Russia were making it clear they also were going to invest heavily in AI for their own military purposes. And then the last thing I'd say on this one is the killer drones lead has distorted the conversation. Everybody always kind of reverts to this idea of lethal autonomous weapon system, but AI applies to every single mission. Some of it will be very benign. Beneath the surface, you won't even know what's happening. It's just like we're doing in our daily lives. AI is incorporated in everything we do, and it's going to be that way in the military. There will be certain things that get the headlines, but they're less. Back in 2017, if you said you were bringing AI into the military, this is what the average American thought we had in the Pentagon at the time. Some version of this, killer drones. And if it wasn't that, it was either on the left, we had a basement office that had all the UFOs. That story has never changed. Everybody's convinced we still have UFOs, despite the release of things saying, yeah, we really don't have UFOs. And if it wasn't that, it was aliens in Area 51. These legends live on, but the reality is so much different in 2017. I'm here to tell you this is the capability we have with computer vision. You could tell the difference between a hot dog and not a hot dog. And outside the research labs, there really was nothing else. This is paying some homage to the series Silicon Valley, if anybody has seen that. But this was about the world I walked into in 2017 when we took on Project Maven. Again, not to insult anybody's intelligence, you hear a lot about AI hierarchy in the AI stack. The stack is a combination of those different things: compute, data, models, energy, applications on top of them, and human talent. Human talent must always be considered, in my opinion, part of the AI stack. Compute, on-prem, cloud, all the semiconductor stuff play into it. If it's in red, generally the department did not have it and still doesn't have those things in red like the commercial tech companies have. One thing the department has, they have data. Energy, they got a lot of energy, especially at the national labs, but it's still not comparable to what you see out and what the big commercial tech companies are doing with. The stack kind of starts with the hierarchy of basic automation, then symbolic or rules-based and expert system, and then it has progressed over the years into connectionist AI, which really is the neural network, and then you're into generative AI, transformer technology, then reinforcement learning. Now the focus is on human machine interaction or integration, depending on your preference of way of talking about it. And now we're into a world of much more autonomous decision making. And I will talk more about the idea of AI agents being one of, I think, the most important futures we ought to be talking about, because in addition to the opportunities AI agents will bring, they will bring a lot of associated risk. I just put future AI on top of the pyramid. I consider that to be kind of either artificial general intelligence or AGI or artificial superintelligence ASI. I don't even want to label them on a slide because they're too theoretical for me. They're very amorphous concepts. People define them differently, and it's a constantly moving bar what we mean by AGI or ASI. I just say future AI. But that's it. I just wanted to say this is kind of the world of AI as it went from 1956 to today, and is moving as fast as a mongoose on amphetamines. So now I want to talk a little bit specifically about Project Maven and where we got started and kind of where things are now. This is what we were trying to do, move the world's largest bureaucracy at the pace of a Google. Impossible task, perhaps, but that was our kind of going in argument with Project Maven. So Project Maven was all about full motion video from drones. That was the start of it, and it has become much more than that with Maven Smart System. But really, this slide gets into what was Project Maven at its core. So we started with a problem of human intel analysts staring at video screens, usually MQ1s or MQ9s, and just staring for hours and hours and hours on end. The problem was we were going to run out of people. We were getting more collection from more sources than at any time in history, quite literally more than any time in history. I call it the success catastrophe. Humans could no longer deal with the amount of information coming off these platforms and all the other sources that were feeding into the whole intelligence, analysis, exploitation life cycle, which some of you might remember as PCPAD or PED, processing, exploitation, and dissemination. So we wanted to figure out what could we find to augment, accelerate, and automate that collection and analysis process. And I used those three A words in that order specifically and deliberately, where we weren't talking about automation quite yet. We were not saying your job is going away. Instead, the message was we need more of you. We're not going to get more of you. We need to help you augment what you're doing and give you a cognitive assistant, and then look at how we automate more and more of that entire life cycle over time. So we launched a pilot project. Bob Work said, this is it. Finally, somebody who actually is doing some AI. Most of them were not really doing AI. A lot of people tried to tell Eric Schmidt we're doing AI. He dismissed almost every single one of them. He looked at what we're doing. He said, not great, but it actually is real AI. And so we were off to the races and put a pilot project together. Project Maven memo was started, signed out by Bob Work. And these are just very quickly some biggest lessons I took away from this. And these are lessons that are just as germane today. You should never start with an AI solution in search of a problem. We had a problem that we could not have solved without AI. And it was possible. If you read that Project Maven book by Katrina Manson, the journalist, it was really, that book is not a technology book. It's a cultural, personal dynamics book. So we had this amazing startup culture within this massive institutional bureaucracy. Very difficult to pull it off, but thankfully, Bob Work, Secretary of Defense, and everybody above me and below me kind of had all of this same vision and alignment and a passion for changing the future. So that passion never left. I had more of it in Maven than I did in the Joint AI Center, just by the nature of the animal, a very narrow problem we were trying to solve in Maven. And then when I got to the Jake, we had a whole bunch of different projects we took on, everything from medical to finances to warfighting stuff. No surprise to those of you in this call, whoever dealt with, worked with, or worked around the government, the tech is always the least of the problems. I really look at the tech mostly as a commodity these days. It's culture change that was the biggest challenge and will be the biggest challenge when trying to shake up the status quo. And then this other one, which really changed my view of the world, that this technology was not coming from the traditional defense industrial base primes, the Raytheons, the Lockheeds, all those companies that build thing capital assets did not have kind of the AI technology we were looking for. So we entered this with a commercial first philosophy, which then by the time I stood up the Joint AI Center, the Jake, I also carried over with me. With just the department is not going to build these and other than a very small scale pilot project. And so big lessons on that one is a commercial first philosophy, especially when it comes to software. Um, this whole project got enough attention that Katrina Manson just wrote this book. It's just fairly new on the street. She's out there giving talks and interviews on it. It's a very interesting story. She got a lot right. I interviewed with her several times. It really is a story about Colonel Drew Kukor, the disruptive Marine Corps colonel that made this project work. Without Drew, Project Maven doesn't exist. Whatever I did, which was mostly providing top cover to Drew and his team, it is a fascinating book. I learned some stuff that I didn't know about my own team because I was a little bit removed as a three-star versus what was going on day in and day out. And now what we see, this has come out very recently, probably seen some of the stories. Pentagon is going to adopt Palantir's Maven Smart System as a program of record. So Palantir, business savvy that they are, took the core of Project Maven, the computer vision natural language processing, and then has built an awful lot around there. Their AI platform, Foundry, all these other things, their ontology. Now they're bringing in somewhere around 150 different sources of information and intelligence to give a shared common intelligence picture and a shared common operational picture. So a SIPCOP in terms that some of you might recognize. It's kind of been that holy grail for as long as I was in the military. Could you ever have a single pane of glass with everything in there? We're not there yet, but I will say that Maven Smart System is closer than anything I've seen before. Then the next big question, if it becomes a program of record, does it actually become a command and control platform versus a situational awareness program? And then I guess the last thing I'll say about Maven Smart System, you've probably also, some of you have heard that Claude has been integrated into Maven Smart System as a frontier model, gives it even more power. What they're using Claude for, I'd be happy to talk about that if anybody questions. I have some ideas. Some of it is just my theories. Some people have verified some of it, but a very powerful combination that's being used right now in combat operations against Iran. It was used in Venezuela, which kind of got Anthropic's attention. I don't think they fully understood what Maven Smart System was doing. And then with Iran, it's also being used. Um, Very short story of a saga that many of you probably have heard something about. We were working with Google. We gave them our wicked hard problem. Some of you, if we're working with AFRL, may know what the wide area motion imagery or whammy sensor is on the MQ-9. Very specific sensor. It was on a unweaponized MQ-9. And that was such a hard problem to solve that the only people we could find that could do it were the Google software engineers. They took it on, they did great work, very proud of what they did, but there was a little bit of a protest inside the company. Once it leaked out, they were trying to bottle it up. Then it became known they're working with this thing called Project Maven. Protests sort of formed within the company. A bunch of people signed a petition. So when the contract ended its natural period of performance, Google elected not to renew the contract. Very disappointing for a lot of reasons, but Google did right at the C-suite level by helping other companies get the intellectual property that was so important to making this whammy sensor work. And it was fantastic in so many different ways, but it just became too hot for the company. The way I used to talk about this until very recently was, yeah, extremely disappointed, hated to see happen, but it was a good canary in the coal mine. Much rather that it happened then than happen in the middle of combat. And here we are 8 years later, and the exact same thing is playing out with Anthropic and a little bit with Google. Some employees signed another letter inside Google, but the current leadership of Google basically said, tough luck, we're working with the Pentagon and the IC. So we learned a lot from this, mostly about transparency and the importance of it. Google was very good to us in so many ways, but there are left some scars on this one, and Google has spent about 7 years getting back in the government's good graces. And fair to say right now, they are in good graces. So a lot of lessons learned about that episode, and I'll leave it at that. Then I was asked after that whole Project Maven to go stand up the Joint AI Center, separate than Project Maven. Sometimes they get conflated, but they were separate organizations. After I retired, turned into the Chief Digital and AI Office, and it moved under the Undersecretary for Research and Engineering. I am not a proponent of that move because it was under the Deputy Secretary. I understand the rationale for making the move, but I think it diluted its importance a little bit by shifting it under R&E. And I'll just leave it at that. There'll be, if people in the Pentagon would make a different case for why putting it all under Emil Michael was the right thing to do. This is my taxonomy here. It's just what I believe is playing out in the military. Began with perception, detecting and identifying objects. It's pretty basic back in those days, circa 2017. Then we started bringing in very early versions of generative AI to get a sort of a contextual understanding of what might be happening in a scene. That began in around 2020. Today, it is really the addition of frontier models to whatever else the government has to begin to understand how to draw inferences and weigh options. That is ongoing as we speak. To me, what I believe is really going to be the next big one is this idea of agency. So systems acting on human intent with minimal supervision, perception, context reasoning, AR, VR, XR, agents, robotics, and autonomy, all wrapped into one. And I'll get just a little bit more detail in a second. That, my guess is, we're seeing early signs of it right now, but I don't think we'll really see the full power of this until maybe the next 2 to 3 years, because it's going to be complicated to bring this into the military for a lot of different reasons. But it has come pretty quickly. Today, it's still it doesn't, as I said earlier, people don't talk a lot about computer vision, natural language processors. Still are the core of a lot of government AI projects. Now we have Gen AI.mil stood up. Access from everybody inside the department has access to Gen AI.mil. Robotics, there's so much going in the world of robotics, and I'll talk about two programs specifically as I get ready to close out a little bit later. Mostly that has been non-AI. That is beginning to change, and I think we'll see the pace of change accelerate with pretty dramatically over the next 2 years. There's so much focus on the drone counter drone fight in all the services that this is going to change pretty quickly. And then for me, it was always about all of this was done in a cloud environment. Project Maven was a distributed common ground system. It was being done by analysts at the big ground sites. We always knew we had to get AI to the tactical edge, especially in those DDoS environments, denied, disconnected, intermittent bandwidth, limited environments. That, of course, is going to be the environment we will face in a fight against China. And of course, Ukraine is seeing it in the fight against Russia and vice versa as we speak. So a lot of it will be about how to bring all these capabilities down to those sort of environments. And then as we think about the next couple of years, if you haven't heard sort of this idea of world models and large geospatial models, they're going to become the center of attention more and more of the next 1, 2, 3 years. I see the next big thing because I'm seeing this not only just on the research side in the commercial companies, tech companies, but now in industry, listening to a lot of CEOs, CTOs, CFOs talk about this idea of you're going to hear terms embodied AI, physical AI. To me, this means we're going to cross the digital physical divide. It'll be a combination of so-called traditional AI, which is weird to say because it hasn't been around that long, plus large language models, plus multimodal agents or agentic AI, and robotics and autonomy. What does that mean? A human gives instructions to a machine. The machine takes that intent and executes with consequences in the physical domain. So digital intent, physical consequences. That's going to change the world as we know it today, especially in the military. So there's a lot of concerns about how advanced this is going to be and how quickly it's going to happen. And then there are a lot of people saying the scaling law is reaching its sort of plateau. People like Gary Marcus have been saying for years, neurosymbolic AIs, maybe we got to get back to the next big breakthrough. We're already seeing examples of this in some of these big projects where it is the traditional connectionist AI going back and bringing in some of the old experts or rules-based or symbolic AI, putting those together in something some people will call neurosymbolic AI. And then this idea of how do we actually get these things ready to go out in the real world? It's being done in the form of digital twins, World Foundation models. Two people, Fei Li, who sort of was the GOAT when it came to computer vision in ImageNet, she has now decided to start her own company focused on this idea of world models. How do you get these machines to figure out how to operate in the physical world, but doing in a simulated environment? Extremely complicated, but very promising. Jan LeCun is another one, said, nope, this is the future. And then you've got to actually put this into sort of time, space, perception, points on the map, so to speak. So large geospatial models will be the next part on that one. So a lot happening there. I just want to, this is a little bit switching gears. Everything I ever did in 36 years, whether it was Intel or sort of operations, broadly speaking, was about risks and managing risks. So when it comes to AI, how do you understand the risk and how do you manage those risks? One of the things we worked very hard on because it was groundbreaking. Nobody in the department really had a handle on what AI assurance was. And the way I describe AI assurance, test and evaluation, validation, verification, plus responsible AI. We had a lot done in the time I was still there to include signing out the DoD AI ethics principles before I retired. The Secretary of Defense signed them out. So we made a lot of progress on what it's going to take to make AI assurance happen. The intervening 5-6 years have been spent in the department trying to figure out how do you put this into practice. What is it? What is it to go from theory to execution? There are an awful lot of similarities between hardware, software, and AI in terms of test and evaluation, but there's some enormous differences as well. What we were trying to figure out is what do we keep from the hardware side, still move quickly, get the rigor and discipline of test and evaluation that the military has been famous for decades, and bring that rigor and discipline into AI. So Dr. Jane Pinellas from Johns Hopkins kind of stood up the test and evaluation for Maven. She came over to the Jake, stood up a community of interest. DOT&E, the OSD level DOT&E, did not have expertise in this area. So it was really building test and evaluation from the ground up. And I always talk about four things when talking about all of this. It's context, complexity, urgency, and risk. It's easy for the media to kind of talk about everything the same, but all of you will understand why context matters so much. The difference between, say, hitting Chinese PLA Navy ships in an invasion scenario against Taiwan versus hitting downtown Tehran, massive differences in what you're looking at and what risk you're willing to take. So a lot going on in the area of AI assurance still to this day. And I always look about once you understand what the risks are through this idea of red teaming, test and evaluation, you got to learn how to mitigate those risks. And how do you do that? Well, not surprisingly, it's a combination of technical controls, either hardware and or software, policy controls, when are you allowed to use it, when are you not allowed to use it, and then procedural controls. Many of you familiar with rules of engagement, special instructions, local and guidance, combination of all that. And now you really start getting a little bit more complicated with agentic AI being introduced. And I've seen one paper in a way that I really found resonated with me is preventive governance, detective governance, and corrective governance. So preventive on the T&E side, detective in the form of sensors being put on these capabilities to let the humans know when something was going wrong or to flag for further human oversight. And then corrective is to figure out to fix the things that are not working. There's an whole bunch of work that's going on in the commercial world on this. The government is trying to also figure out what the consequences are of these things happening in the heat of battle, which is quite a bit different than your average commercial use case. All right, just a few emerging issues that I wanted to bring up. The first one to me is, and I think it's playing out as we see things happening or unfolding today. We do have a lot of political leaders and military commanders who are talking about these and probably, or in most cases, do not have a sufficient understanding of the system's operating characteristics and their limitations. And if they don't understand them, they're making decisions about employment that are half-baked decisions. They understand the hardware stuff very well. They understand the normal software stuff pretty well. They do not, in many cases, understand how AI works. So that is, to me, quite a bit of an issue when you're putting these things into combat. We used to, the real name of Project Maven was the Algorithmic Warfare Cross-Functional Team, because we all see a world, and it is beginning to unfold in front of us today, of algorithms fighting other algorithms. In this future, is there a risk of losing the ability to control escalation or to send these signals that humans send to other humans that we understand will be interpreted by humans in the way we want them to be interpreted? What if machines are now doing that? Machine is not going to do the signaling interpretation the way a human is. I'm not saying it's right or it's wrong. We just need a lot of more thought put behind it. And then a big one, this is so much is being talked about on this one right now, is at what point does delegating use of force decisions to AI cross an ethical line? I have my views on that, but a lot of other people have views as well. And then to me, as somebody that did spend so much time in uniform, that was a commander, five different times, I see human responsibility and accountability never going away. The software engineer is not going to be held responsible in one of these systems fails in the middle of combat. So we have to sort out how do we maintain human responsibility and accountability, even in a world of increasingly advanced and intelligent autonomous systems. Yes, we're all getting very aware of the idea of automation bias, that humans tend to believe in the results of machines and sometimes shouldn't. But I spent a whole life in a military and intel community seeing all sorts of human biases. So are we putting a bar higher for machines than we ever set for humans? There are new terms you might hear: cognitive offloading, cognitive surrender, or now epistemic capture, where these systems are becoming so advanced that humans are essentially deferring to the machines and losing the thing that makes us special as humans: deductive, inductive, abductive reasoning, causal reasoning, all those other things that make us human. Are we giving up on those? My answer to that is we shouldn't. It requires more education and training across the entire military to make sure this doesn't become a significant issue over the next few years, and it could be. I do worry about this a lot as these systems shift from complicated to complex. I think the unknown unknowns will begin to really rear their ugly heads. We're not going to be able to really predict in advance emergent behaviors, cumulative cascading risks, once you connect a lot of these very advanced AI systems in and across extended networks. And once we get to agentic AI, which is executing human intent with humans not there present at those decisions, that's just going to make the risk even that much more problematic. Our frontier model is just another piece of software. My answer, pretty clearly, is they are not. We have to be very careful about throwing these into use in combat for the first time. Just because you sort of learn how to use ChatGPT in our home computer does not mean you know how to use it for life or death consequences on the battlefield or in the intelligence profession. So I just think we need a lot more education and training on their use. And then I spent a lot of time thinking about what does human machine interaction look like, unlike any other hardware, software we've ever experienced before. So to me, that's one of the most important areas of research over the next few years. So right now, I would say there is a gap between how we understand humans operate and machines operate, and we need to figure out what it looks like in this more increasingly intelligent, agentic, and autonomous future. It's a spectrum. On one end of this, you see the four words I mentioned earlier: context, complexity, urgency, and risk. All of this factors into it. On one end, I can very easily see a future of warfare in which the algorithms are fighting other algorithms in the areas of cyber and electronic warfare. At the other end of the spectrum, AI and nuclear command and control: humans, forever only humans. Everything else between those bookends is some constantly shifting, dynamically shifting relationship between humans and machines. There are people who have studied machine human interactions. They've done so for decades. That work will continue, but it needs to be a different kind of work because we're seeing these systems have capabilities that no other software before them has had. So that to me is just a very lucrative line of research. I think about this in that first bullet. It's very serious to me. The challenge ahead for smart machines is not just defining the role of human input, but where, when, and how is that control applied? I don't even use the term loop anymore. In the loop, on the loop, off the loop. They confuse people. They're fuzzy concepts. I just say from the beginning, there will be human agency applied, but the question is where, when, and how is that human control applied? More often than not, it has to be further left than it's ever been in the design and development phase because humans may not be there in those final decisions about applying lethal consequences. And this one, I believe, will become a real factor with agentic AI. At some point, we're seeing research indicate these systems are going to be quote unquote clever enough, which is a little bit anthropomorphic, but they can work around human intent. And we're finding cases where they've done that. So the humans will be able to tell these systems what we want them to do, but I think it'll be increasingly difficult to stop it from doing the things we don't want them to do. A recursive, self-improving system is on the horizon. We're seeing examples of this right now. And if we start putting this stuff into wartime operations, we may be seeing consequences that humans never expected, anticipated, or desired, and we have to put mitigation procedures in place to start thinking about what's going to happen. Swarming drones. Matter of time. We hear a lot about swarming drones. I haven't seen any real examples of true intelligent swarms yet. They're all usually GPS or equivalent positioning drones, all the great Chinese firework displays with drones, all these other things. More and more, we're going to see this world start to unfold in the next 1 to 3 years, maybe at the outside 5 years, where intelligent swarming will happen, increasingly happen. I also think a lot about the AI nuclear nexus. I wrote this piece for arms control today. If you asked me when I was lieutenant, would I ever be writing for arms control today? No, I did not think I would. But last fall, I was asked to write something on AI and C3, and I put this out there. Yes, it is even more complicated than you think. And I have quite a bit of experience on the nuclear side as well. A lot going on with global instability. There's this, I hate using the term AI arms race. I think that misstates the case quite a bit, but there is no doubt there is a racing dynamic, and that's a commercial race. It's a national security race. It's both of it. And I think we're going to see some risk of global instability, especially between the US, China, and Russia, as each try to beat the other in terms of a so called finish line, which does not exist because AI is constantly evolving. Um, some of you on the call may be familiar with this directive called 3000.09 Autonomy and Weapon System. I just wanted to highlight this is, as far as I can tell, still today, the only publicly available unclassified directive by any military about policy of autonomy and weapon systems. It was updated just a couple of years ago. Mike Horowitz, if any of you know Mike, back he was in the Pentagon, now he's back to Pennsylvania, University of Pennsylvania, did the revision on this. It does take into account AI-enabled autonomy now, whereas before it was just autonomy. So this one is kind of the Bible on AI-enabled autonomous systems. It calls for a couple of different senior level review processes before design and again before fielding. It's a very good document. Some people will find flaws with everything, but to me, this is the cornerstone document about the future of AI and autonomous systems for the Pentagon. All of you have been following, just like I have, the war in Ukraine, this juxtaposition in some cases of trench warfare and cutting edge technology. It's playing out as we speak. And as I say, it's not the case anymore, AI or javelins, it's AI and javelins, and eventually it's AI in javelins. It's hard to express how incredible the pace of adaptation, agility, and ingenuity is on both sides, mostly by the Ukrainians to begin with, and the Russians seem to counter it more and more at the speed the Ukrainians are coming up with solutions. It is just a remarkable fight that's going on right now. And then I don't know if some of you may have worked with at one point Richard Danzig. I think he's getting on a little bit in age, but I find nobody has a more well-reasoned approach to new technologies than Richard, former Secretary of the Navy, and recently had a ship named after him. And I will never have a ship named after me, so I give him great deference. And I really think he hit this in a piece he called Technology Roulette. These are complex, opaque, and novel technologies, and we're going to see emergent behavior, sabotage, and accidents, and we have to be prepared for that future. No technology ever survives the crucible of combat without going wrong, and we should expect that's the case with AI as well. Former director of MI6 in the UK, I love this quote. You may not be interested in geopolitics if you're in the tech business, but geopolitics is interested in you. This technology is geopolitical and it has geoeconomic implications, unlike any technology in recent history that I can think of going back quite a ways. So it is a different world thanks to AI and geopolitics. I'm involved in a bunch of track two dialogues between the United States and China, multilateral, bilateral. These are the two power players in the world. There's no if, ands, or buts about it. Israel's got some impressive AI. Singapore's advancing. UK's advancing. These are the two power players. And what I don't want to see is a race to the bottom with AI. So I spend a lot of my time trying to have these dialogues about why it's in both countries' national self-interest to set the bar in peacetime a little bit higher than otherwise we would expect in when this very complex, continuous competition under uncertainty. And I could speak forever just on the U.S.-China AI relationship. This is a piece I wrote on that very dynamic right there. It's on the Johns Hopkins ACF website. My title is In AI, the United States and China and racing in the dark. And I point to opacity and uncertainty as the key characteristics of the AI competition that really drive things in a way that are very different from the Cold War, even though people are tempted to go back and draw Cold War comparisons to the nuclear world, to this world. These are different technologies. There are some parallels, but for the most part, we really need some updated thinking about the dynamics between the two biggest AI countries in the world. This one I just find almost humorous as I put these lines like week after week, I added a new one. I'm not going to get into a whole lot about how this played out, why it played out, where we stand now, but we went from Anthropic being used in the Venezuela raid to Anthropic being designated as a supply chain risk by the Pentagon, to Anthropic suing, to the judge blocking the Pentagon, to within the last couple of weeks, the Pentagon saying, well, yeah, but we're using Mythos to understand where our cyber vulnerabilities are. I said that we would never have another Google. I'm glad we were the canary in the coal mine, yet here we are, and the same story is playing out, slightly different players, but it's the same thing. You have to remember these are commercial technology companies. It's not Boeing, it's not Raytheon, it's not CACI. They're tech companies in Silicon Valley. They see the world differently than the defense industrial primes. 1903, biplane. 66 years later, man on the moon. 1956, this is where the AI stake was driven in the ground. 66 years later, AlphaFold, Nobel Prize. The question is that a more impressive advancement in 66 years than biplane to man on the moon? I would actually make the case that the man on the moon was more impressive in 66 years. But that's as far as I'll go because now it's a different story. These three things are changing every mind, changing my mind every day. Unprecedented pace of change, breadth and depth of diffusion, and the rapid rate of adoption. You just look at how quickly ChatGPT was adopted worldwide. It's just stunning how fast things are changing. So, yes, the 66 years from 1956 to AlphaFold, very impressive, not world changing. I think the next 10 years could be world changing. I don't know that. Humans will find out as we put this technology into play if that's really the case. I do hear a lot of people talk about AI in wartime, and I always think about this. Are there objections to the use of AI in war about AI? Or are they more about war? More often than not, people are objecting to war, and AI is another reason to object to war. It gets to be a very emotional argument by a lot of people and organizations, but I try to draw it back to why AI can actually be very helpful, reducing the risk of civilian casualties, collateral damage, so on and so forth. Two slides just on what's going on. These are illustrative. There are lots of programs in all the services. Some of you on this call may have day-to-day interactions with CCA program with the Air Force, but there's a lot happening here, which is this collaborative combat aircraft. Right now, I think it's a kind of a bridge strategy. Will there be a manned platform kind of guiding these sort of drones? I think in the future, not too distant future, why have a manned airplane there at all? Things are going to advance so quickly that you'll back to the swarming capabilities. But this is really what's playing out right now. A lot of lessons, I hope, being bring in from Ukraine. On the other side of it, Lucas, if anybody's heard of Lucas, it's the basically the Iranian drone, the Shahed drone built by US companies, mostly like the Shahed drone. But now Shield AI, which has been in the autonomy military domain now for as long as I've 2017, I remember visiting them early in my Project Maven journey. They're being tasked to put HiveMind in. So we're going to see this swarming of Lucas, a swarm of drones this fall. I'll be fascinated to see the results of this. I'm not convinced we will have full autonomous, smart swarming systems by as early as this fall, but I don't think it's that far away either. As you can see, HiveMind has been put in an awful lot of different things. So there's a lot happening in all the different services on autonomy. I just wanted to point those two out because they're moving fast and we're seeing more and more emphasis being put on. Okay, just get to the end here. Just a few final thoughts on my part. Bob Work was right on the third offset strategy. I thought he was right at the time, and I think he's right today. Unfortunately, though, adversaries have had the same view of the third offset. They're trying to leapfrog our leapfrog. So that's why China's investing. China's investing in AI for so many different reasons, but they also understand where our strengths are. We're seeing with the fight against Iran an asymmetric military fighting us in ways that they know they can never beat us sort of one-on-one conventionally in a symmetric fight. So more and more of this, the third offset as a strategy was a great idea. The problem is the adversaries are figuring that. So now what might be the next big offset? I have some ideas, but I don't have an answer. Um, Mike Horowitz has written about this. Others have written about this. We're in the era of inexpensive and precise math, intelligent math, more often than not in the next few years. I don't think we're prepared in our military for the pace of change we're seeing, and our country is not prepared for the drone threat to the homeland. It's going to be just a matter of time. I'm shocked personally; it hasn't happened yet. More attacks in the U.S., but they're coming. I will never argue against hardware. It's the industrial base is what wins wars over the long term, logistics and industrial base. That will always be the case, but we do need senior leaders to have a more software centric mindset. And how quickly can we really buy and adapt thousands of AI enabled systems? I actually think we should be thinking about buying latent capability because if you build something too quickly, it's obsolete by the time the next crisis comes along. So you build the capacity to build them, but like Ukrainians are doing, figuring out, nope, we've got to disassemble them, reassemble them with the most current software, change the hardware a little bit. And that's happening at the front lines by operational units. Incredible. I said this earlier just to emphasize AI is itself, it's an enabling function. What matters to me as a military person with a lot of background in this world is new operational concept, warfighting concept. How do you change your organizations, reform and redesign them? What does next gen C2 look like? How do you start promoting a new generation of people that understand this in their very core? It's hard as a senior leader. We're all kind of grown up in the world that we knew, but that world has just shaken to its core. So that's what's going to make the difference over the next decade. It will not be the technology by itself. Technology will be a massive contribution, but these other things will be just so much important to how we learn how to fight. And we're seeing that sort of innovation play out. And that's my last point on this one. I am concerned about not learning enough from it than I am in learning a lot. People have a tendency to say, oh, come on, that's a different kind of fight. The China fight will be different. I acknowledge that, but there are so many lessons that are fungible. I'm not sure we're catching on to it fast enough in our military. Adaptability, agility, ingenuity, speed, action, counteraction, operation in denied environments, and edge computing. Ukrainians, this is a Darwinian process right now. You don't adapt, you die on that battlefield. And the Russians are losing by the thousands monthly, if not more than that, because some of them are not adapting. We're going to have a wake up call unless we really learn some of these hard lessons about the adaptability and Darwinian aspects of it. I always come back to the human. This is the thousand-yard stare in World War II. The human is at the center of this. Technology helps, but we're never going to remove the human from fighting. I just saw this picture today. This is the same person before the war started in Ukraine and a Ukrainian soldier 4 years later. That's what we're trying to do is make sure that person has everything they can do. It doesn't matter what the uniform is. It could be U.S. Air Force, U.S. Army, Marines. It doesn't matter. But it is a human-centric world in warfare. We need to give the technology to help that person, not replace the person. Try to take them out of harm's way, but acknowledge what the world's going to be like in the next few years. So I guess what I end with is it Prometheus or Pandora's box? Do we discover fire or let the genie out of the box here? It's both. We have to make decisions about what humans do over the next few years about decisions to use this technology in the best possible way. So with that, I'll stop sharing and we'll just see whatever time we have available. Walter, I'm happy to get into a discussion.
I'll tell you, and John will back me up on this. We've had these talks pretty much once a month since COVID, and I think this has been one of the most thought-provoking ones, possibly the most thought-provoking one we've ever had. We'll take questions at this point. I have a question or two. John popped up on the video so fast, I'm thinking he must have one. That was a
I
record.
do.
I'll let you go first, John.
Sure. So, So our institute does a lot with AI, so I'm not gonna bash it, but we like to say we like to use it smartly. I'm just gonna talk about we hired a former DARPA program manager. I think he said it best about training. That a young child only needs to see a few cats before that child can recognize every kind of cat. Where an AI system, that's why you have these huge data centers. You have to put at different angles and train on that stuff. So we're nowhere near how humans think at all in terms of AI. That's a problem I do have when they use the word artificial intelligence. My question has to relate to training. What I see is when I see AI training, they're not really trained on the mathematics behind AI to the level that
Hmm.
we do. And they're trained basically in a black box. And I think that can be dangerous if they're not understanding the limitations at the theoretical level. And just wanted to know what your thoughts were on that.
It's a tough one because there are more black box than ever before. And I think we're beyond the point of understanding exactly what happens in a frontier model. It's hard enough with computer vision, but we had lots of data to support precision recall, intersection over union, all these other metrics. We understood that these frontier models, we don't know what data they were trained on. We don't have the source code. The military is not getting access to the weights and biases. So to me, what I think about is the auditability, traceability, some degree of explainability. But what I'm really interested in, and I've had many conversations and thinking about this, is the idea of gaining justified confidence in those systems over time. I stopped using the word trust mainly because I had people from the community say, yeah, we're not using the word trust as much anymore. One, it's binary. I could use trust with a piece of hardware, and it's kind of basic, but get in the airplane, not get in the airplane, do you trust it? With these systems, we saw this from the very early days of Maven, and nothing has dissuaded me from changing my mind since. Is nobody really has confidence in them the first time they use them because they're foreign, especially this computer vision thing. Like, hey, it's a bounding box. What is that? Probabilistic. It's not deterministic. But the people that embraced it began to get more confidence over time, what I would call justified confidence. But where I would get more concerned, to your point about the training aspect of it, do that in the sandbox environment to the maximum extent feasible. Exercises, war games, experiments, single service, joint service, allies, and partners to build that experience over time. When I hear about Claude being jumped into combat with more even smart system, I do get concerned about that because I'm not sure there has been a rigorous training regimen. You say, well, do you need it? Yeah, I think you do need it to understand. I think what you're getting is not just the normal operating parameters of the system, what are its limitations? What risk am I buying? I need to know some of that. I cannot make a risk based decision if I do not understand the risk to begin with. But I'm not sure we'll ever get to understand anymore what's going on inside that box. Some people are working on different ways to do that. But what I want is predictability, reliability, and a confidence level that allows me to say, yep, I'll use that in combat. I'll never forget the first time we tried to deploy this halfway through a special SEAL team deployment in the Horn of Africa. There was a petty officer analyst said, "Get that thing out of here. I've never seen it before. I'm paid to do this job. I don't know how this thing works." What we learned from that is go back to the pre-deployment spin-up training and spend some more time thinking about how you could actually use this. That's part of it. The other piece is really important. I bring this up a lot. There are a lot of doomsayers about the military and AI. I take the opposite approach. I said, one thing we get right in the military for as long as I've been on this planet is we understand how to bring in technology, do training with it, get academics on it. For me, bring it into the simulator. Just new piece of software or a new weapon comes out. Boeing comes up, shows up. Okay, here's how this thing works. You get your dash one, dash 34 updated to say, okay, we're going to study that. Friday afternoon, everybody gets in the ready room and everybody talks about the weapons officer and stuff. Okay, we got this new thing. Let's talk our way through it. That process is well defined for the military. Why shouldn't there be something like that for AI? And I'm not talking about the AI that's in your just office and makes your office run better. I'm talking about the warfighting stuff. That is going to take a while, I think, to understand what that looks like. And I think there will be a temptation for this commercial technology just to be, oh no, it's just use it. You'll understand it once you use it. I don't want to take extraordinary amounts of time to figure out how to use it correctly, but there should be a process to do it better than I think is probably playing out as we speak. And you're right. Even John McCarthy in 1956, who came up with this artificial intelligence term, said, "Yeah, probably shouldn't have used that, but it worked. It's augmented intelligence, machine intelligence. I think augmented intelligence is much better for me, but now the tech companies have glommed onto that. So your point is entirely reasonable and fair. I agree with you, but I'm just not sure we'll ever get to the point where understanding what goes on in the middle of that. Agentic AI complicates it 1,000-fold. I'm involved in discussions right now about these international dialogues about trying to convince each other that be careful how fast you go down this path. Because if it goes wrong, it goes wrong for everybody. And I think a lot could go wrong with this autonomous level capability. But yes, has it been oversold as a technology for a few years? It has. But I just now seeing the pace of change start to take off, and it's in everything. I can't. None of us can do a single thing in our lives anymore that doesn't have some aspect of AI embedded in it.
Yeah.
Great. Yeah, thank you. I agree fully. And like I said, we use AI a lot for what we do, but like they say, we use it smartly. So,
Yeah, yeah.
anyways,
There's
thank
a
you.
lot of dumb AI.
Great presentation. Yeah,
Thanks.
yeah, true. Thank
Okay, Jeff, I see your question, and I'm going to ask it after my question, just because General Shanahan just talked to agentic AI and the risks. Um, I copied a thing from one of your slides. In future algorithmic warfare, is there a risk of losing the ability to control escalation or to send carefully handcrafted human-to-human resolve and deterrent signals? And that brings to mind the instances where we almost went to nuclear war with the Russians, but really on a hunch, it was prevented by a Russian submarine commander during the Cuban Missile Crisis or a Russian watch officer. I don't remember the time period
Yep.
where the moon rising or something was mistaken for ICBMs. And I don't even know if I have a question at the end of this. And then you popped up your article, AI and Nuclear Command and Control. In a world where the advantage often goes to the person who reacts faster, if there
Yes.
are agentic AIs in the loop on this, sounds like huge risks.
Yeah.
Just comments.
Absolutely agree with you, and you're very timely because I just got back from Reykjavik, Iceland, where the Arms Control Negotiation Academy had their annual conference. I spoke on a panel, but who cares about my panel? The panel before us was there to talk about the 40th anniversary of the Gorbachev-Reagan summit, and two of the panelists are at the National Security Archive. Not a government. It's not a government organization. It's a private. But it was absolutely fascinating. The third person on the panel was there with Gorbachev. He's from the Soviet Union at the time. And I cornered the Tom afterwards, who was he's the director of the National Security Archive, in talking about the Cuban Missile Crisis. Over the years, I've suspected we were close to nuclear war. I am more convinced than any time in my life we were that close to nuclear war. What prevented it was individual human decisions who had every legitimate authority to launch for a couple of different things that had happened, including that sub incident. He had nuclear torpedoes. They were getting depth charge. Absolutely could have done it, but decided, nope, going to sit one through. If that had been I don't think the answer is anything other than it launches, unless you built the system to then do what humans do. But then why don't you have humans doing it? So I think what I am really worried about is the idea of these will be insidious changes over time, that any individual introduction of AI seems like no big deal, but when put together across broad networks, include the intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance piece of it, and all that information is being consolidated, fused together for a decision maker, now we're in new territory. And we don't understand those risks very well. That's Richard Danzig's point in his paper on technology roulette. It holds up very well, 8, 9 years late after he wrote it, because we've learned this lesson with other technologies. And the Cuban Missile Crisis was one example. The other one's Able Archer. Able Archer was another one. They were convinced we were mobilizing for a nuclear war. We were convinced they were mobilizing for nuclear war, absolutely mirror imaging each other. In
Mhm.
some of these research papers being written, like Ken Payne, who I know Ken, he's written one on simulations with advanced AI, that it escalates to nuclear exchange extraordinarily quickly. Why is that? Because most people, when they play games that result in data being used to train other models, you're trying to get to an escalation. You're not trying to de-escalate. So, your n equals what? 2? N equals 2 for real use of nuclear weapons in combat in history. So that's a very limited training sample size. So I think
Mhm.
we really have to think carefully about all the good stuff that AI is capable of doing. But I don't think we have a grasp right now on what if. Let's go back in history and pick 4 or 5 different cases and say, what if it was AI? Could you have trained it to say, don't do it? I don't know. Yes, you could. But if the agentic AI is so sophisticated, it will say, I got it. I got your intent. I got a
Mhm.
different way of executing than you ever thought. And it's too late. Yeah, that's why the
Yeah.
nuclear one me is just red line, red line, red line.
Mhm. Yeah. Thanks. We have a question in the Q&A from Jeff Bird, who I will offer is the co-chair of the chapter of the Canadian Aeronautics and Space Institute in Ottawa. And Jeff, I just want to mention when General Shanahan and I were talking before the talk started, his son is an exchange pilot at
Nephew.
Bagotville. So despite all the friction you hear going on at some high levels in our government, we are still cooperating. Anyway, Jeff's question is, do you think that a system of independently guided agents can meet our speed and scale goals while keeping the governance and multidisciplinary roles that we want, like red and blue and purple and green?
Yeah, I'm not sure. I would say I'm kind of focused on three things right now when it comes to this world of agentic AI. One is evaluation, the test and evaluation piece of it. Two is the governance of them. How do we really put in realistic governance? Can we do that with increasingly advanced systems? I think we can, and we have to. And then the other one is just integration into systems and system of systems and networks of network. But the technology is evolving, I think, faster than the normal government bureaucratic processes can play catch up to. And we're going to find, I think, the technology is outpacing governance unless your bureaucracy is becoming agile enough to be flexible to say, look, we're not going to give specific governance line by line. But you need to take into account behaviors of these systems could go from here to here. So you need governance processes in place, the human oversight piece of it. So there's a lot. I'm wrapped up in a lot of this or in different conversations about what does governance look like. Well, I think to me it begins with that evaluation side of it. These are models coming over from commercial companies. They have done their version of tested evaluation, but the government should not take that absolutely at face value because you shouldn't. But unfortunately, these are going to be closed models. You're not going to know those source data. You're not going to know the weights and biases and the other things. So now I don't know. I think these companies are going to start thinking like I know OpenAI is doing right now, thinking about this and going to execute is put what Palantir would call a forward deployed engineer. OpenAI is now going to hire some people to be embedded with the military. So I think that's one of these is to help the military figure out how to do this. But I think on the other hand, the government needs to put people in those commercial companies to be the eyes and ears of what's changing and how fast it's changing or whatever. So I think the governance is a very broad word, and I understand it might by itself be a little bit amorphous, but it is how do humans oversee these in ways that give us confidence that they'll work as advertised. And when they don't work as advertised, what's the human ability to stop things from happening? It's easy to lose sight of this. Sometimes I'm myself guilty of thinking 5, 10, 15 agents. There are people talking about hundreds of thousands of agents out there doing all their things that they're doing. And the next thing you know, some CEO of some company says, oh, yeah, wipe my entire email inbox and all my archives were deleted because the agents were smarter than the human. I mean, there's crazy things happening. That's kind of funny in a non-military context. It's deadly serious in a military context. So I hope I was getting at what you're asking about with your question.
Yeah. And Jeff, follow up if you need to, and thank you. Uh, I have one more question, and this was from your bullet. We've entered the area of inexpensive, precise mass. Our military is not prepared for the pace of change, and our society is not prepared for the drone threat to the homeland. And I immediately thought of the trucks in Russia that opened up,
Yes.
and little drones flew out and took off to blow up strategic bombers. So if you could just talk to a little more detail about you think the nature of that threat in the US.
It's entirely feasible right now in this country, it really was an ingenious. And if I have the facts right, it was the Ukrainian intel crowd that pulled that off, less the day-to-day operations side of the house. It was the word brilliant sometimes can be overused. It was brilliant operation. Concealed, surprised the hell out of the Russians. They now have these drones capable of hitting Moscow. It has changed the entire nature of the fight, where Moscow thought it was they had a sanctuary. There is no sanctuary. Well, the sanctuary exists probably back in Siberia,
Right.
but anywhere up to and including Moscow is not anymore. There, you can get 2,000 kilometers inside with all varieties of drones, everything from sort of your smallest fiber optic to the autonomous, no GPS, pattern matching, whatever it is, going long directions to either deliver weapons, do ISR. That's capable of happening right now. I mean, just kind of may try to put two and two together. I remember hearing stories. I'm not sure if they were apocryphal or real stories. As I said, I was the commander of Offutt Air Force Base, but back in the day of SAC, Strategic Air Command, there were all sorts of stories about the Soviet Union had parked rail cars outside the gates and were collecting. So this is not new as a concept. The deadly part of it's no longer collection. It could be kinetic. It could be go figure out how to hit Washington, D.C. Or anywhere across the country. And it doesn't take much to have the psychological impact, right? They're not going to take down the United States government with these capabilities. At least I don't see any capability right now that would suggest we lose. But I think the psychological impact for the average American citizen will be extraordinary, would change everything in our lives. Like you walk outside, is there something above you? When you read about the psychological impact of what's going on in the fight in Ukraine, people are almost, I guess it's shell shocked for the digital age. You can no longer walk. This article I was reading today, the Substack post, the soldiers may not be seeing the sunlight for 2 months at a time. Nobody will go outside. They're doing all their control from a foxhole because the moment you're outside, you get somebody, a sensor somewhere sees you. And if it senses you, you're capable of being killed. And so now you've got these unmanned, the people that are forward deployed on the Ukrainian side get injured. They have two options apparently right now: walk out up to 18 kilometers while injured, or the only other option is to send a UGV in to pick that person up and bring them out with an autonomous ground vehicle. Other than that, you're going to die. That, I mean, imagine the psychological impact of it. The typical American feels like they're safe. Hey, we've been safe for so long. Nobody's ever capable, other than with ICBMs. What does that mean now when you're capable of being hit by the smallest possible drone to something pretty substantial? The cruise missile threat doesn't go away, but this new threat is something I don't think we're fully prepared for. The counter UAS fight has been struggling in the military. Who owns it? Finally, the Army got assigned it, but it feels to me like the old the MRAP task force, the JIATO task force, the ISR task force, all the things that Bob Gates had to stand up as a Secretary of Defense because he couldn't get them done institutionally. He had to work around the system. It worked, but it wasn't an institutional solution that lasted after all of that war in Afghanistan happened. We need institutional solutions here. And unfortunately, I don't think we're going to understand what those look like until we're hit. And then people really get a wake up call. And what are we going to do? Probably overreact. It's the whole, now we stand up a version of DHS, all the things that we do with the pendulum in the United States politically, but it's coming. And I think psychologically, we have to prepare this country that, yes, it's going to happen, not the end of the world. Here's how we protect against it. And then we just sort of take common sense measures to sort of be resilient and pick ourselves up and figure out where those drones come from. How do we counter them? How do we go after the source and all these other things? It's a really hard problem because of the size of our country. Golden Dome is not, by the way, for whatever Golden Dome is going to do, it's not going to solve this. It's just not, because these are very hard to find and see. Russia is finding out the hard way. They're not picking up these systems right away. And we've seen Iran do that. How many times do you have to hit a hotel in Dubai before you've made your point, right? They don't have much military capability left conventionally, but they have suicide boats, they have ballistic missiles, they have mines, and they have drones that can hit an AWS data center in the Middle East. It's a hotel, it's a ramp in Qatar or whatever. All of this is just the Iranian way of saying, we're still here. yeah, and taken us out yet. And it has the effect of closing the Strait of Hormuz.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I don't think we have any more questions. Like I said when you first finished, this was terrific. Um, I think
Thank
I
you.
first came across you in an article in the New York Times. I'm so glad I read that article that day.
I speak a lot
Uh,
to journalists these days. Mostly
yeah,
they want to know about Maven and the school strike
yeah,
and all these other things. But
yeah,
yeah, no, thank you so much to both of you for the invitation to join. I love what you're doing. I've looked at all the slides and actually called up a couple of videos from the other ones. There's some pretty good people that you bring in. So
yeah.
you got a good gig going there in the Niagara Frontier section.
Yeah, we've been very fortunate, and we got another one today. So thank you very much, sir. I hope to come across you again sometime, just
You
because
bet.
it's so
Whatever I can
freaking
do to help.
interesting.
All right. Thank you.
Okay,
Thanks,
Thank you. Have
Harvey.
a
take
good
care,
night.
Good,
everybody.
good night,
Yep.
everybody. Thank
Bye.
you.
Bye-bye.